Michigan State lands 2 instant impact guys out of the portal, and then we are joined by Allan Trieu of 24/7 Sports to talk portal, recruiting, so much more. Let's go.
You are Locked On Spartans, your daily podcast on the Michigan State Spartans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Spartan friends, Spartan family, Locked On Spartans listeners, thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Spartans. It's your team in green and white 5 days a week. Please rate, review, subscribe, and stay tuned for our chat with Allen Trieu of 24/7 Sports, one of the best in the recruiting game. He's the Midwest recruiting expert over there at 24/7 Sports. We talk portal, we talk recruiting, a little bit of Nick Marsh talk at the very end. But guys, first, we got to kick this off with some actual portal activity here. The last time we talked, late on Saturday, we said, you know what? Might be a good idea to keep your eye on Omari Kelly, wide receiver out of Middle Tennessee State, and then Luka Vincic out of Oregon State. And then wouldn't you know, within about 14 hours after that recording, they both committed. All good news for Michigan State here on the portal trail. Now, Omari Kelly, let's get to know him a little bit. This 6', 180-pound receiver out of Middle Tennessee State. First, Auburn, though. He did start his career over in SEC country. Last year for the Blue Raiders, 53 catches, 4 touchdowns, first team All-Conference USA. Rivals had him rated as a top 15 wide receiver prospect in this portal cycle. So, needless to say, pretty good get for Michigan State. Now, last year for Middle Tennessee State, about 76% of his snaps at that wideout position, 24% of those snaps in the slot. He also did return punts for Middle Tennessee State, so could he bring that over to East Lansing? Yeah, one could probably make that guess. But I think it's interesting now with how Michigan State, which is largely going to have a new receiving core outside of Nick Marsh, how this is all going to stack up. So now what for the wide receiver position? Well, you just throw Nick Marsh at the X. You could throw Mr. Omari Kelly at the Z, or vice versa, whatever. I'd imagine right now as things stand, they would be your wideouts if the season started tomorrow. Now, it might be you or me playing slot receiver, or it could be one of these guys right now, namely Christian McCray. We've talked about him a little bit here this last week from Kent State. I believe he'd profile as a slot receiver should he come to Michigan State at 5'10", 165 pounds, but he was electric. And really just about the only electric thing for the Golden Flashes last year. They went 0-12. But hey, he still had a really strong season, 705 yards, 9 touchdowns. If they can get McCray, well, that's your starting receiving core right there, I would imagine. Now, they're not done bringing in other wideout targets, too. DJ Black from Limestone. If you're like me, if you've never even heard of that college before, I don't know if that outs me as a Division II, just non-ball knower. Apologies for that. But yes, he's visiting Michigan State in the near future, too. Now, DJ Black didn't just start his career at Limestone. He was also from South Carolina beforehand, but had a really productive season last year for Limestone. He is 6'3", 195 pounds. So let's say that you get DJ Black, you get Omari Kelly, and no one else. Well, then your starting lineup's probably looking like Nick Marsh as a wideout, Mr. Black as a wideout, and then Omari Kelly in the slot. Nevertheless, you're starting to see this wide receiver room take some shape here. After losing every single receiver that recorded a stat last year, except for Nick Marsh. I feel contractually obligated to say that whenever we talk about receiver. A lot of turnover at that position this offseason. Speaking of turnover, speaking of position of needs here, that offensive line got some help. Luka Vincic out of Oregon State, redshirt sophomore for the Beavers last year, played 315 snaps over 10 games, including 2 starts at center. He committed to Michigan State too. He hopped in the transfer portal, took 1 visit. That was, of course, to East Lansing, and he committed to the offensive line coach that brought him to Oregon State to begin with, Jim Michalczek. So a lot of familiarity there in the system and with the coaching for Luka. Now, if the season, for some reason, kicked off tomorrow, or, hey, let's say that we need a replacement for the Independence Bowl or whatever it is where Marshall can't play, well, this is what our offensive line is going to be looking like tomorrow. Just pretend with me that all these guys are healthy right now and that 2 of these guys didn't sustain major knee issues. But Stanton Ramble at your left tackle. And then on the inside, I would go Christian Phillips, Gavin Brocious as your two guards. You're going to throw Luka Vincic over there at center, and then Ashton Leppel at right tackle. Guys, a lot of way to go in this offseason. I would be a little surprised if that's where things settled with the offensive line. Hey, that's where it is right now. And before getting to our chat with Allan Trieu of 24/7 Sports, got an email from Matt C. over there, lockedonspartans@gmail.com, writing a thought that a lot of us Spartans have right now. I'm seeing no activity on the defensive line in the portal, and this was the worst defensive line in college football last year, particularly at defensive end. We lose Bogle, we lose Talley. If the season started today, who was on the two deep? This is my biggest concern. Please give me anything to be positive about. Now, we're going to talk about an interior defensive line prospect with Allan here in a little bit, but as it pertains to defensive end and, pass rushers, I'm not seeing a lot of names, guys. And what would be on the two deep for defensive end? It would be Jalen Thompson, Anthony Jones, Tyler Gillison right now. And beyond that, I know I just said you might have to play slot receiver out there, guys, but you also might have to play defensive end too for this team. Look, I'm not panicked just yet. Again, there is a long way to go before next season. There's still even 2 more weeks for guys to enter their name in this portal cycle. There, of course, is a spring portal cycle, but well, I'm not panicked. I'm certainly not satisfied with the activity or complete lack thereof for the defensive line. We talk about that with Allan, how this position usually is one of the more, scarce in the portal, I guess we could say. But yeah, we are keeping our eye on that because it's almost odd there's not a lot to keep our eye on, if that makes sense. All right, guys, let's get to our chat with Allan Trieu of 24/7 Sports right now. Here's a man that just had way too much time on his hands. Allan Trieu, one of the godfathers of recruiting over there at 24/7 Sports. He wasn't busy enough, so we are very lucky to have him join Locked on Spartans. Allan, in all seriousness, how on earth do you have time right now to join this show? Are you just the busiest man in the world?
Well, I have to thank you for working around my schedule, but of course, I was going to get on, several guys committed, and it's been a busy morning. But I always always happy to hop on and help talk some Spartans. But it is really, really nuts right now, and it has been for the last couple of weeks from early signing to now.
I feel like it's a 12-month grind in your position right here. But focusing right now on Michigan State, we just talked first segment. Hey, they got a wide receiver from Middle Tennessee State, Omari Kelly. They got Oregon State offensive lineman Luka Vincic. Now, what would make this a successful portal cycle for Michigan State? I know that's an incredibly broad question, but is there something that you're looking for? We're at the end of this first portal window. You would say, hey, Jonathan Smith, the boys are pretty good over there.
Right away, and I'm sure some Spartan fans would echo me right away. It was got to get offensive line help in, and got to get some skill talent on offense at the receiver position. So if you're going to have your first 2 commits out of the portal, be at any 2 positions, I think those are 2 big ones. So those are huge needs, especially offensive line. I think right away getting some experience, a guy that they have some comfort with, obviously. Huge. And now you can go fill some other needs. So from here on out, I still think maybe another skill guy. Talking about receivers, you're talking about bringing in another running back. I think the other line could use a little bit of help. They've been more aggressive on the offensive line than they have the defensive line. But I think another defensive lineman possible. I know they have a linebacker visiting. I think in the portal, you want to leave yourself with no glaring needs. And so even if you get some depth, even if you have, you feel better about what your 2s and 3s look like after portal season, I think that's huge. But I would have said a couple days ago, offensive line, wide receiver, 2 biggest needs, and you fill those right away.
It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. And I want to get to future visits here potentially coming up this week, but let's go back to last week. Let's stay with the offensive line because Josh Thompson, one of the highly most sought after guys in the portal. Allen, it's safe to assume that everyone's after him, maybe even the Detroit Lions, who's to say. But where does Michigan State sit with him right now? Do we have any fighting chance, or should we just go ahead and say, no, that ship will probably sail for the Spartans?
I think there is a chance. I mean, I think I'm pretty tied in Josh's situation, and I really don't feel like there's a strong lean right now.
Okay.
With him, in high school, there was a period of time there where we thought he would end up in the MAC. I mean, he could have ended up in Eastern Michigan's class. Northwestern came in a little bit later. He didn't have any other Power 4 offers. So he hasn't been through this process before. He hasn't visited a lot of schools in the recruiting process where if you're a big-time recruiter, like a guy like Jaleel Hurley has been all over the country in his high school process, Josh has not had that. So I don't think he's taking these visits just to be able to experience it. I think he legitimately wants to see, like, I don't really know much about Tennessee or Auburn or LSU or some of these schools. I'm going to go check it out. That includes Michigan and Ohio State, which are closer to home, but he didn't really visit them in high school. So I think we're going to get a lot more of a clearer picture of Josh as these visits happen. But right now, Michigan State was scheduled right away. They're obviously inside the state. He is close to his family. He's got an older brother that he's close to that lives in Detroit. Dad's around. So I don't, with it being 1 year, I don't think going to another part of the country is the end of the world for him. But I know Michigan State has availability and they have proximity to home and family going for them. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. I really don't feel like there's one lead horse in that race right now.
I'll take that as a positive answer right now. We'll take any sliver of good news that we can get. So appreciate that, Allen. Much appreciated. Now, when it comes to, this upcoming week, of course, there's going to be some more names on campus. Who are some of the biggest names that you know of coming into East Lansing?
Yeah, so a couple of the bigger transfers. I think Grady Kelly, defensive lineman from Florida State. Like I said, there's not as many D-line names out there, but he's one coming from a big program, so he's going to be an important one. Connor Cox is coming in, tight end from South Carolina. So he's supposed to be on campus, and I think those are two of the ones coming from bigger schools. The running back transfer from North Carolina Central is an interesting one, Omari Taylor. People may not be as familiar with him because it's not a big school, but he's super productive there. Virginia Tech had him up for a visit. He's kind of emerged as a top prospect. Joshua Eaton, the corner out of Texas State, really, really good player. He's going to be on campus as well. And then coming up in the weekend, you have Jaden Yates, linebacker from Marshall. I covered him in high school, a guy from Ohio, and super productive at Marshall. Michigan State is not offered yet, so we'll see what takes out there. But he's got TCU offered, Ole Miss is offered. I would have to think if things go well, boxes get checked, that he could be a guy that Michigan State goes after harder and extends an offer to also.
So Josh Thompson, I think a lot of State fans would agree with this. Like he's number one for wish list item, if you will. Who would you pit as number two? Or, you could even make your own number one. You're free to make your own decision there, Allen. But I would just go with Christian McCray out of Kent State. He'd be an electric guy to have on the offense. Is there anyone that would even come close to coming up to the Josh Thompson level of number one on the wish list?
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say McCray. Okay. I think he just adds such firepower to any offense. Electric guy. And, Kent State didn't have the greatest season. No. And you look at the numbers he still put up on that team. I think that guy is, you remember taking a guy like Jaden Reed from Western Michigan and the impact he had coming in from the MAC. I think Krishan is the same kind of guy. And he can help you in the return game. So that's a game changer right there. And nothing against any of the other transfers, but this is the guy who changed the scoreboard. And I think that and along those same lines, Reggie Virgil from Miami, Ohio, I think he's another really talented guy from the MAC. So, yeah, no doubt Josh Thompson high on the list, but I think Christian McCray right there. And then I would put Grady Kelly up there just because, again, you win the game on both lines. I think defensive line is a place where they can use a more experienced body. He's another one that I would look hard at.
What position so far is the emptiest in the portal? Is it that defensive line? Because we were kind of throwing that around in the first segment too of like, this team needs defensive line help, but just like we've already talked about here, not a lot visiting East Lansing. Is that a byproduct of not a lot of defensive line, or what's going on, Allen?
Yeah, and as I talk to people in the industry, agents, others, schools we have contact with, the biggest struggle is finding defensive linemen, and especially interior defensive linemen.
Okay.
I've said this going back to last year, that if you are an inside defensive lineman, you will get almost over recruited in the portal because there's just a lack of bodies. And I saw that right here locally. JVR Suggs went in the portal from Grand Valley. We had no idea what was going to happen with him. He ends up at LSU, ends up being, one of the biggest portal guys in the spring. Same thing. CJ West was at Indiana or at Kent State, enters the portal, had a bunch of schools looking at him, ends up at Indiana, starts at Indiana. I think you see that a bunch. The Western Michigan had 3 defensive linemen enter the portal, including Braden Fisk a couple years back. I think any kind of big interior defensive lineman, that's the hardest to find. So I know, just talked to some of our reporters down at the other MSU, Mississippi State, and they're bringing in a Northern Illinois transfer. And he's, they looked at his numbers and then they were like, the production doesn't speak to him being an SEC player. But it's the body types and the ability to give you snaps on the interior. You saw that with Ruquan Buckley a year ago.
Sure.
Didn't come in with a lot of expectations based on the stats at Nebraska and ends up playing a big role and played really well at towards the end of the year. So I think that's the kind of guy that if you have any kind of ability on the interior of the defensive line, there's definitely a lack of those in the portal.
Is there anything different with this portal cycle than ones previously? Any oddities, more positions than usual, or is it pretty much status quo outside of everything?
I think there's definitely more players in general. And there's a ton of, I think we're double or something from previous year. And I think with that now, the process has evolved. The players I think more players have agents. And so there's a lot more negotiation going on. There's a lot more dealing with agents than previous. I think in other years, players kind of entered the portal not really fully knowing what they were getting into. Now there's a lot more knowledge. I think a lot more of them enter the portal having an idea of where they're going to visit, where they're going to go. And they have people now advising them a lot more. So these, more than ever, I think there's agents and other people involved in the process, which in some ways may be easier on the schools because you're working through somebody instead of trying to get a hold of these kids while they may be in class. A lot of them I know Josh Thompson, day one, for instance, he was in class at Northwestern getting, 80 text messages and a bunch of phone calls and had to cut his phone off, So now you're able to work through an agent who's been through the process. So obviously that's going to add some difficulties as far as there's a person advising them on what they should be getting NIL wise and what they should be looking for. But it's a little bit easier to set some things up. So I think that this portal cycle is busier. The calendar's a little bit different, but I also think that the kids entering the portal this year in the portal right now are a lot more educated because those first couple of years, those players were really kind of the guinea pigs that had to figure it out for this group to be able to know what they know.
FanDuel Sportsbook is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook. They're keeping it hot for this college football playoff coming up. They're keeping it hot for NFL. And, guys, they're also keeping it hot for the PDC Dart World Championships. That's right. They got all sorts of options over there at FanDuel, and that is what makes them America's #1 sportsbook. And, hey, if you're a new customer, well, it gets even sweeter for you right now because new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So if you get a little pinch and you got to know some stats, well, you can check out those latest stats right there on the same place where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, guys, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets should you win that first $5 bet for new customers. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Also, guys, Prize Picks is keeping the daily fantasy sports rolling this NFL season. Now, what is Prize Picks? It's simple. It is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for your shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Make the holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks. It is, again, guys, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. And I'll say it one more time. You can get up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. All you got to do, just pick more or less on a few stats, and you could be a little more jolly this holiday season. Now, Prize Picks is offering MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. So, guys, what are you waiting for? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today, use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, LOCKEDONCollege, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. And just to switch the topic of conversation to recruiting, Allen, I don't know if you caught wind of this. Michigan State didn't necessarily light the world on fire for the 2025 class. They ranked 50th on 24/7 Sports, if my notes are correct here. Hey, Allen, do you have any good news for 2026? Can this get better? And fully understand it's hard for it to get worse as the class ranking goes, but do you have any glimmers of hope for us, or should we just end this conversation right now? We can just go our own separate ways. How's this going to go here?
So recruiting can be spun any way that you want to spin it.
Oh, it can. Oh, yeah.
Right. Every fan base, like, you got to just trust the staff. And and the funny thing is, you can point to, if I've always said this about recruiting, if you want to say we got to get 5 stars, I can point you to Jamar Chase and all the top guys that have turned out to say, the Travis Hunters, to say you got to land those guys. If we want to say stars don't matter, I can find you plenty of examples of that. I can tell you Cam Ward. I can tell you a bunch of guys, right? So we can spin this however we want to spin it. Being honest, I think, obviously, Michigan State is going to want to do better. That said, throughout the course of my lifetime, the best Michigan State teams were not built on the highest ranked recruiting classes. Obviously, that was Mark D'Antonio at the helm, but Michigan State was one of those schools that every time they took a guy late that wasn't highly thought of, as a recruiting site staff, we always had to kind of go, is this going to be Darqueze Dennard again?
Right.
Or Le'Veon Bell again? Do we need to relook at this guy? And I think if you think about the industry, sometimes we almost overrated some of their late takes, trying to be like, well, hopefully this doesn't burn us again, and I think we've now arrived at a good spot of trusting our evaluations. But the best some of the best players Michigan State has had in the last 10, 15 years were not top end guys. And then you have to add into that at Oregon State, it was the same thing. We're the best teams. Jonathan Smith had some of the best players they had were not guys that were top end recruits. So I think this staff knows how to identify talent. You also have to give them time. I mean, if you had asked me, would I think in year 1, year 2 that they would be in the top half of the Big Ten in recruiting, I would have told you probably to not expect that, because that's not how this staff has typically built their program, and 2, it's just hard to do that, to just walk in, and especially when you're coming from the other side of the country, to establish some of those connections. And I do think that in the 25 class, the focus was going to be a little bit more on portal, to a little bit of a smaller class numbers wise. But I think when you look at the individual talent, you feel good about the top end of that class with guys like Jace Clarizio, Derek Simmons, et cetera. So say all that to say that I think they're much more established in 26. Now that you've been able to recruit those guys for a year, 2 years in some cases, you've been able to evaluate those guys. You feel comfortable, for instance, in a guy they've offered like Cade Kaufman, who they did not have to offer him early, but felt really good about the evaluation. That's a guy they've hit on. That's the type of guy that they've landed in the past. Jonathan Smith, being a former quarterback, trust his evaluations at that position. Had a lot of the top 26 guys in the region on campus for games. And so, you've had the 4 stars from Chicago, the Mikhail Blades and this Nasir Rankins and those guys. You've now gotten them on campus, where when they first got on campus, you think about when they first got to Michigan State, by that point, a lot of the top guys in the region have visited other schools or established maybe a relationship with the previous staff. So that's my silver lining for you, is if you look at along the way in the 26 class, how many of those top targets have been to East Lansing during games. I think the staff has done a good job of doing that. Some of those guys came to spring practices last year. So further along with this group at this point than where you were with the 25 class a year ago.
So what you're telling me is I need to relax, just take a chill pill and let the process play out. Is that what you're saying?
I can't tell you how many times a day I get a Twitter notification from a fan, and in my head I'm going just chill out. Like let it
touch
play out,
grass, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Like, everybody was freaking out about Jace Clarizio when he flipped to Alabama. I get it, but then you see how things come around, right? And to use an example down the street, those fans in Ann Arbor were freaking out about their quarterback position a month or two ago. And what is our staff doing? We're going to have no quarterback. You got to let things finish out before you start freaking out. Now, I get it. I'm an NFL fan. I'm a Steelers fan. And every year I freak out in free agency. They're not doing anything, we haven't signed anybody. And then it ends up okay. So I get the perspective, but I would say it's very early. Relax. And if I had shown you on paper the recruiting class when Mark D'Antonio first came in, the entire Michigan State fan base was like, I can't believe we didn't land Keith Nickel. We had to take this Kirk Cousins guy who barely had another Power 4 offer to speak of, and we scrambled to take this guy. What are we doing? Look how that situation turns out. Now, that's obviously not going to always happen that way, but I think you can be concerned. You can ask questions like, what are we doing? But keep it within reason.
Scale of 1 to 10, just from your point of view, being the recruiting expert, and you see some of the darkest corners of college football internet. 10 just being the absolute most nauseatingly horrible fan base to deal with. 1 being just skipping through daisies. Where does Michigan State fans land? I don't really know what answer would offend me, because if we're up there, then good. That's right. That means we care more. But if we're low, then okay, we're sane at least. So I don't know what answer I want to hear, Allan. No.
Okay, so I don't know that I can give a fair answer on this, because I deal mostly with the fan bases up here. Right. I don't really know what it's like to deal with Texas's fan base every day.
Can't be fun.
Right. There's some of them where I dip into their message board from time to time when they recruit a kid up here, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm glad that's not my primary fan base. Here's the thing. I think they're all bad in their own ways.
Yeah.
Especially
understandable.
The ones that go on a message board and freak out, or the ones that tweet at a recruit. Those are the outliers. Most of the people who attend games and care about the team do so in a fairly reasonable manner. The ones that choose to go and, tell some kid that they're an idiot for not picking their school, we're talking about the extreme cases. So I don't try to separate the differences between the fan bases. The ones that take the time to say stuff to us, usually those fans are the outliers. I think Michigan State fans, they're extremely passionate. And I actually think in the last couple of years, it's been, so I was going to say, I don't have, because I deal primarily with Michigan State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, like this kind of group up here. And they all have their bad apples and their good ones. So I'm going to kind of skirt the answer to your question.
Extremely passionate. That is the PR approved slogan to use for clinically insane people. So I appreciate you dressing that up a little bit for us. I have really good PR people making sure that so there's somebody in my ear right now being like, don't answer that question. Someone's holding cue cards behind your laptop right now. Just go with extremely passionate. This is gonna knock it out of the park.
They're trying to shut the webcam off right now.
Really quick, though, before they shut that webcam off, before we let you go and enjoy the rest of your very calm, relaxing week, Allan. Beforehand, you were talking like you really got to know Nick Marsh well, and of course you have. You're the Midwest recruiting expert. He did great things over at River Rouge High School. Just from your point of view, watching his freshman year, seeing how things have materialized going into the offseason, he got a really nice upgrade in NIL for Michigan State to come back next year. Is all this just of course this has happened this way, or were even you a little surprised of how productive Nick Marsh was as a true freshman here?
Okay, so small Pat, we at 24/7, we had him a lot higher. He was 107 or close to a top 100 prospect for us. I don't think he was close to that high on the other sites. Part of that was getting to see him live last year. I saw him open the season against Belleville, and I've seen Nick really since his freshman year, and I noticed a very different Nick, faster, more explosive, doing some things like returning kickoffs that he hadn't previously done.
Okay.
And, physically always ready to go. And he came into high school ready. He played as a freshman in high school. So I'm not, and that was on a team that went to the state title game. So no, I'm not overly surprised. Maybe a little bit at just how elite he was. I thought he would play. He was the easy choices. Like, this is the best freshman in the class. He's going to be the one that plays early. I think he'll play a role. I think he'll be really good. I think he's going to turn into all Big Ten, All-American, high draft pick type guy. But to say, to perform at that level as a true freshman, maybe a little bit surprised at that. So not surprised he contributed, surprised that like the height he got to. And I know, that brought about a lot of interest. There definitely were. Surprise, surprise, teams tamper.
No.
There were a lot of schools that made it very clear that we would like you on our side. So to me, when you talked earlier about like the biggest gets in the portal, no more important one than keeping Nick.
I like that. Yeah. No, that's bang up. Allan, anything you want to plug here before we let you go, and just get back to the recruiting portal and everything that's keeping you busy?
Yeah, I mean, it's all keeping us busy, but it's not just me. I mean, I think our whole staff, from our national portal guys, Matt Zenitz and Chris Hummer, do a really good job. Obviously, our local MSU guys who Justin Thinn, Corey Robinson, Noah Sprunger, and Stephen Brooks do a really good job. So get over to Spartan Tailgate. I'm on there quite a bit, interact as much as I can on the message board. So 24/7 Sports, Spartan Tailgate, that's where we are. And, from time to time, I'm on BTN as well. So make sure you check out those signing day specials. But, those are the places you can find our work.
Can't thank you enough for your time, all your insight, Allan. Really do appreciate it. Same with all you listeners, all the viewers out there. Thank you all so much. And from here on out, just take a little bit of an easy on Allan here. He's trying his best. It's not his fault that some kids commit elsewhere, and it's just crazy out there. But all right, guys, hey, you already know we're going to be back tomorrow breaking down the Oakland University basketball game against our Michigan State Spartans. But hey, until then, love you all. Go Green.